I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful to you guys for coming and sharing about his impact in your lives and in your countries and your continents. It's very moving to hear these stories. And Nanette, that was just awesome. Wonderful, wonderful. In a few moments, we will sing a hymn together. Before we do so, I'm going to speak a few words. And I actually did not prepare a big speech. That may be happy news. And what I say will not be boring. I was listening to these men, knowing that they would be saying very profound words about my dad. And I was preparing to play shortstop. And so I'm now going to play shortstop by speaking particularly to those of you who are maybe younger, or to those of you who have maybe some skepticism about all that we've heard about Jesus and Christ and missions work and things like that. I saw in my dad proof of the power of God. You've heard it today, but even now it can be difficult to believe. But I saw it happen. My dad's life is a story of change. More than you can believe. And there were two great changes that I want to show you. And I want to show you that it is Christ and only Christ that brought these changes. The first change was that Dad's dad, my granddaddy, was an alcoholic and a mean alcoholic. And you know how alcoholics go through the years. They don't get over it. Alcoholism is a trap. And it breaks you down. It breaks down your mind. It breaks down your relationships. Ultimately, it often breaks down your finances. And alcoholism destroys people. Very rarely does somebody really escape from alcoholism, particularly in East Texas in the moonshining days of the 1930s and 40s and 50s. But God used Dad in a pivotal way to share the gospel with Julius Wofford, my granddaddy, in a way that enabled him to embrace the story of Christ, embrace Christ in his own life. And many of you have heard the story. I'm not going to tell it in length, but essentially there was a day when Dad came home from college and Granddaddy was beating Granny. And Dad was prepared to fight him physically. But as Granddaddy came out of the house, Dad felt the Holy Spirit, a miraculous power. There is no psychology that explains this, okay? This is my point. A miraculous power of God transformed Dad in that moment and enabled him to relax and to just deal with the situation differently than he was prepared to do. When Granddaddy came out, Granddaddy was prepared to fight Dad physically. But when he saw Dad, he just melted. And something began to happen in his life. And he walked down the field to a sort of fence that was there, a gateway. And he stopped. And Dad reported this to us many times. Granddaddy said, "God, kill me." That's the cry of an alcoholic. And many of you guys are trapped in different things. You're trapped in rage. You're trapped in bad habits. And you don't know how you'll ever change. But God can change you, and God can change those close to you. Dad stood beside his dad at age 18 and said, "You should not ask for death. You should ask for life." And in the weeks that followed, the Holy Spirit invaded Julius Wofford and transformed him and broke him free of that alcoholism and changed him into a new man, a loving, calm, gentle man, free of alcohol. That was the first change I want you to see. That's a miraculous change. But the second one happened in Dad. I think that Dad was always a good-hearted man. I think he was born probably a sweet, good boy. But his life was hard. And he did have an abusive father. And he emerged from his childhood full of a rage that you cannot believe. And alongside his Christian walk, he also struggled with a genuine fury that dwelled within him. But in his 40s, he began to deal with that. And he began to bring it to God in prayer. He began to lean into his faith more deeply. And he described, to me at least, I'm sure to others, there was a moment, it's not really a story, but it's one of these moments that happens in your life that was very meaningful to Dad. And I'll tell you what he told me. He had been renting a backhoe or something. He had been renting a big piece of equipment, and maybe it was late or maybe it was going to cost too much, but he was driving to the place where he was going to have to deal with this backhoe, and he was full of this rage that had consumed him his whole life. And it was just eating him alive. But in that moment, he gave it to God in a whole new way. He prayed, Lord, take this rage away from me. And God did it. This was one of those prayers where God said, okay. And he felt the rage just disappear and leave. I don't know what his experience of anger was in the years after that. Perhaps from time to time he felt some anger. But actually, the man he became after that decade, after that experience, is the man that we've been celebrating today to a very great extent. He was full of the Holy Spirit, full of power. He was cleansed of rage, cleansed of anger. He was a father to so many, full of love, full of wisdom. And Jesus created that change in him miraculously, and he can in you as well. It's not just psychology. Dad was a psychologist. He had a doctorate in psychology. It wasn't just psychology that changed him. It was a power acting upon him from outside of himself. We sang earlier about the rolling thunder, God's power throughout the universe displayed. We've been hearing rolling thunder. And each of us has a choice right now to either recognize that God is the master of that thunder, and his voice speaks in that thunder, or to think that it's the rubbing of molecules against each other producing negative charge that then leaps across and makes thunder. You can choose to think that the world is a bunch of particles that you're living in, and you'll die and you'll rot in the ground, and eventually the universe will run out of energy and it'll all be dust. Or you can look to Jesus and ask, are you really there, God? Is everything that they've just been talking about true? Could it be that you can really change me? Could it be that you can really change the people that I love, the people around me? Ask him. For Jerry Wofford, he did it. He did it for his father, his alcoholic father, and he did it for himself in his own terrible inward life. And he'll do it for you. But you have to ask. That's all the faith you need. Jesus Christ, they say that you love me. They say that you love me so much that you gave your own life for my sins. Now I'm praying to you. What do I need to do? And what will you do for me? Will you help me with this problem? Will you deliver me from sin, from bad habits, from painful emotions, depression, rage? Ask him and see what he does. Because in Jerry Wofford's life, what he did was he produced a man who was full of spiritual power to the extent that, as we've just heard, roughly 0.75 million people a year are hearing the gospel through his work. God's power is there for you, just like this thunder. God's power is there for you, but you got to ask.